It's an honor and a privilege as always to be joined by our good friend Harvey Kaye. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I've been just thinking to myself, when I first met you guys, Matt was wearing the hat, not you.
It's almost a hat day for me too. I'm feeling a little bit.
Well, and I was thinking, should I run downstairs and get my LSU cap on as long as you wear
Yeah, we could. Yeah, we're gonna be rivals soon, right?
Yep.
Well, Harvey, I mean, again,
it's always, to see you guys.
It's always great
to
to
see
see you and appreciate you taking the time, folks. Remember that Harvey's also going to be joining us in the post game as well. But I mean, there's a few things that I wanted to talk to you about tonight, Harvey. Just like for disclosure's sake, so people know that Harvey is now an advisor to the Marianne Williamson campaign, which is very exciting in a lot of ways. But before we get to Marianne Williamson and this campaign, I know we've had you on to sort of talk about this in the past, but like one thing for us when Biden first takes office, there was all this talk in progressive media, not so much the Jacobin, but maybe the more mainstream progressive media, if that makes sense, about how Joe Biden is like this embodiment of FDR, and Joe Biden's going to be like a reluctant FDR, was sort of like the line. As a scholar of FDR, I mean, could you give us your assessment of the first few years of the Biden presidency?
Yeah, and I just will note that my assessment after 1 year was actually a long interview with Luke Savage for Jacobin. Oh, and I was requested to say hello to both of you from Luke. Okay,
nice.
He was just Luke. Praising you in a number of texts today. So
that's wonderful.
So there you go. Well, okay, this FDR thing it caught me by surprise when they first did it. And of course, Ron Klain, I assume, who was the chief of staff at the outset for Biden, made it a point of getting Biden to put a portrait of Franklin Roosevelt up on the wall. Now, let me make it clear to everyone, so I don't have to read it in the sidebar there. There is no doubt about the sins politically and perhaps even morally of FDR. Okay, we don't need to go there. I don't want. That'll just take us back over the same old territory. But the better question is that if they were projecting Biden as, in some ways, the new FDR, then there were certain kinds of things that Americans had a right to expect. And by the way, most Americans did not expect what they really should have expected, and I'll get to that. Here's what I mean by that. Well, and I'll also remind everyone that back when Obama ran for the presidency the first time, that would be 2008, that every magazine of a political sort, maybe some of a non-political sort, portrayed Obama as the new FDR, the resurrection of FDR. And I mean it from The Nation over to National Review, the flagship for many years of the conservative, I put this in quotes, intelligentsia in the United States. So there was no, that was supposed to be the case, and that was decidedly not the case. Okay, fair enough. No reason to argue that. With Biden, one might have imagined that he would have possibly picked up on the idea itself. But let's not forget, and not to I don't want to trivialize the conversation, but let's take the first instance in which he revealed that he was not FDR. So the question of a $15 an hour minimum wage that Bernie proposed as part of the American Rescue Plan. Now, you could say, well, it couldn't work because you had Manchin and Sinema. Well, it turned out that 8 Democrats in the Senate blocked it. And I will note that 2 of those senators were the senators from Delaware. Now, let's not forget, I mean, likely if they were the senators from Delaware, that means along the way, their political careers were mentored by Joe Biden.
Yep.
And as we go forward, I want everyone to realize that victory in legislation is not going to be the only thing Americans are going to look for. They're going to look for the fact, has this president made an effort to rally, first of all, the congressional delegation of Democrats, and beyond that, American political forces, from labor to, what we used to call the civil rights movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, and a whole host of forces that should have been mobilized in support of the kinds of things that he promised and often fell into the case. Well, he had Manchin and Sinema to deal with or whatever. Okay, so for a start, that looked bad. You couldn't get $15 an hour minimum wage. I mean, by the way, it isn't just Biden. It's this whole Democratic Party. Yeah. It's just maddening, unbelievably maddening. Mm-hmm. And I remember everyone got really excited because he changed the legal counsel at the National Labor Relations Board. Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, in a very fundamental way, over this past more than 2 years, what we've seen is the National Labor Relations Board has a lot of work to do. And my understanding is they never increased the budget for it. So that's not going to help all those workers out there. Let's not forget the movements, the efforts to organize in Amazon and Starbucks, the two main things we've been talking about for a few years now. They have to go shop by shop. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the number, but the number of Amazon warehouses is just like multiplies like bunny rabbits. And the Starbucks, I mean, think about the effort to organize Starbucks across the country. Actually, that has been an incredible campaign. Anyhow, so it is the case that they failed in those terms. Then they didn't get Build Back Better, right? But let me jump ahead now to something which still haunts me, and people may not appreciate what was really going on. So the railway workers desperately wanted not simply a wage increase, they wanted sick days. Mm-hmm. And I'm surely most Americans had to have been shocked to find out that sick days are not a part of the contract for these folks. Okay. Now, my understanding that this would have been a conversation before that it ever came up as a bill to block a strike by railroad. It would have come up in the previous summer, August, September at the latest. And I cannot help but imagine, because I see no reason not to believe that Biden basically talked to the railway boss and said, don't worry, and repeated the idea, nothing's going to change. I mean, literally betrayed the workers. This is the guy who claimed to be, sorry, I'm getting all revved up here.
This was, I'm sorry not to cut you off, but like, this was, I found to be like one of the darker moments of like, of a lot of things. I mean, this was a real setback.
Even more than the BBB thing. I think this was,
Yes, even more, I think. And by the way, more telling if you're a union person. Mm-hmm. I mean, oh my God, we can't debate in the middle. So now, think of this. Think about how unimaginative this administration is, because you had the November elections coming up, November 2022, and Christmas not too far off beyond that. Biden should have gone in to the railway guys, railway bosses, and said, here's the deal. You're going to do exactly what the workers are demanding, or I'm going to be the president who saved Christmas. I will sign an executive order based on national security and decency, nationalizing the railroads until these things are effected. And I, as president, will make sure that those things are granted. And if you want the railways back, you're going to have to bow to it. I mean, think about that, and then he could go before the American people and say, I cannot imagine a Christmas shut down by railway bosses. Mm-hmm. I mean, they might have done damn well. They wouldn't have lost the House probably in November as they did. Okay. So
I mean, the election, like, it seemed to me like the labor unions did them a solid by delaying. Maybe my memory is hazy on this, but my understanding is it could have came to a head prior to the election, and Biden administration was done a solid that it was moved after it. And then, so like any election
they had a temporary deal. Yeah. They negotiated a temporary deal in the summer.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, to keep it off the front pages. And like, that was not to their benefit, it turned out.
Yeah. Well, the temporary deal is you don't act yet. We'll screw you later.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? We'll screw you at Christmas. How's that? That's what we'll do.
No, but like, I mean, I appreciate like that point, because I think a lot of times when people talk about Biden, both like, let's say maybe like the left, and I'm talking about like the DSA members, Jackman Circuit, right, is like, you have to recognize, for example, that like the president has tremendous amounts of power, both formally and informally, and the way that they wield that is oftentimes as important as like the constraints that they face, right? Because like kind of like MSNBC thing is like, well, we can't be disappointed in Biden because like he hasn't had like these big super majorities that he would need to legislate. But like in this example right here, one of that I think was very consequential. You know, like remember too, folks, and I know you know this, but just like to the audience that like this comes up to vote in Congress, right? This vote that happens on the request of the Biden administration, right? This was not something that was forced on him by the Republicans. This is them being proactive to pursue this tactic, which they could have done something very, very differently on, as Harvey was sort of laying out there.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the shocker that I don't know I believe AOC voted along with others.
She did. So only Rashida Tlaib voted against breaking the rail strike.
And Mary Peltola.
She
had the best line.
I don't know Mary Peltola. Who's that?
Alaska, I believe, a new incoming freshman, and said, you know, you can't cross labor, which is all that needed to be really said. So
I like her.
I'll find the full.
Like
I'll find the full.
It's all right. And then and AOC was interviewed by, was it Ryan Grimm, I guess?
Yeah, it was
and asked that question. Was it? No, it was David Sirota. Sirota,
yeah.
I believe it is. And she danced. Sorry, I'm not trying to play off her original pre-congressional dance. She danced on the question. I mean, she should have just said, "What a terrible mistake I made."
Well, I mean, like, I want to keep the focus a little bit on them,
Yeah,
but
sorry.
like, you know, no, that's fine. Like, I mean, I was going to say something else that, like, no, I mean, I think that was one of the darker moments for like the entirety of like the Bernie movement, in the sense of like this was a really important moment in the fight for working class people, and when it came down to the wire, obviously Biden fails, right? Like, but like, frankly, like expectations for that are low. It was a really disappointing moment to see something that was so clear a line could be drawn, and not being able to be there. And like the AOC defense, I'm sorry, I'll just say it's like it was a very strange one where it's like she talked to some workers who said this, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, again, like you know, whatever. But like you are like allegedly like a socialist in office, like you should be able to look at the way that power is sort of distributed and what different factions exist within like the labor movement, right?
Yeah.
And when you have radical unions basically like literally saying things like we should be nationalizing the railroads, and you're choosing to talk to, and in fact, like she was even talking to railroad workers, for the most part. She talked to a little bit of leadership, and one of the unions that she was saying she talked to, I believe, like represented like grocers in Long Island, right? Which is like fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't talk to everybody, but it was like one of these things, like I talked to the group, right? Like I talked to some workers, therefore I have the understanding, versus like a Marxist or a socialist approach is like, where are the fissures? Where is like the tension? Who is leading the more radical and militant side of this thing? Anyways, it was just like, it's something that's been personally very devastating for me to watch. Like I can't say tremendously surprised, but I think it was something that was so bad for that left project that we've all been a part of for so many years that, like, to me was in some ways more devastating than like a Bernie loss into South Carolina or anything else that we've been through.
Well, I mean, it really was I mean, look, the Progressive Caucus is progressive in name only as a group. Let's face it. But they were dubbed the Squad. One presumed they would coordinate to some extent. Okay, and their capacity to, you know, in fact, I'll tell you, and this may eventually segue us to Marianne Williamson, is there are times when they don't seem to realize that if they stood up publicly and issued a manifesto, something along those lines, they'd be helping their own party. Bowing to what the Democratic Party is about right now is just literally going to take the Democratic Party nowhere. That's the key. Okay. And the Biden administration has been really disappointing. I used to joke, I probably told you, maybe you guys heard me say this on Michael's show or even here once. The one time I really liked Joe Biden is when he plagiarized his speeches. And why was that? Because he plagiarized Neil Kinnock, who was the head of the British Labour Party and came out of Welsh coal mining family. So, you know, I thought, hey, this guy could be pretty good. He chooses his plagiarism carefully.
Well, Biden voted against breaking the rail strike in the 90s too, as a senator.
Oh, that's the friend of the working person, right?
Yeah.
Well, so just programmatically, folks, Harvey is going to be joining us in the post game, and we're going to be talking a lot more about this in general, and also people can leave us some questions. So, so just so you know, I want to talk a lot more about Marianne Williamson Harvey, but just so you know, we're gonna do about 10 minutes before we jump over the post game. So I wanted.
So we're not here for the next hour with everybody. We're going to do.
Yeah, we'll release some of the good stuff
Okay.
for folks after. Don't worry about that. But for people who want to get this live with us now, you'll have to jump over the post game. But like in this first 10 minutes, because I want to talk more in depth with you.
Post game is for patrons, correct?
Post game is for patrons. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone out there, you hear that?
Yeah, you should be coming over. But you know, just like in 10 minutes, anyways, we're gonna talk more about it more in depth. But like, you know, like you've come out behind Marianne Williamson's campaign, and you know, we just talked about some of the problems with Joe Biden's presidency. I mean, I know this is a broad question, and I'm not worried about you being able to answer it though. Could you tell folks like why you find such hope in the Marianne Williamson campaign right now?
But can I do that as a personal story?
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay, I hope this fits in 10 minutes. Okay, if you had asked me a year ago, say April, what do you think of Marianne Williamson? I would have said to you, I have no idea. I did not know. I mean, I heard of her. I knew she had run last time, and I liked the fact that when she knew it wasn't going to happen, she backed Bernie. I mean, I knew that, but I really didn't know. And out of the blue, she contacted me and said, "Would you come on my podcast?" And mostly, I mean, anybody who has 2 million followers invites me on anything. I'm not going to say no. Okay. And I said, sure, but I didn't actually know what she wanted to talk about. So I was hypothesizing. So I said, you know what? I better read one of her books. So I actually went out and I bought this book. Now, let me make two things clear to everyone. I think I've only used the word spiritual a dozen times. That was the 13th. Okay. And the second thing is I have not bought a book with the title having the word love in the title, probably since the 1960s, when everyone was reading The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm, who was a member of the Frankfurt School of Social Research. Okay. So this was not but when I read it in preparation for whatever was going to come, I can tell you, I really liked it. It isn't a book about love, although that's imperative in her discourse. It really was a real conversation with the American people about where we've gone wrong and what we need to do. And now she's not a socialist, okay, but none of these people are, okay. I was looking for a candidate, and at that point I wasn't actually looking for a candidate, but I was fascinated to talk to her because of the things she said in that book about politics and civil society and so on. And then she, in fact, I went onto Twitter and I said, people should read this book. And I'm going to make something even more remarkable of a statement. I actually think it's the best presidential campaign book I've ever read because, and I used to have my students read them whenever it was an election year. Obama's was a triangulation, basically. In fact, my students back then liked McCain's presidential campaign book more than they did Obama's campaign book. And my students were overwhelmingly a progressive group. Anyhow, so it came as a really, really big surprise, and as a read, even better than Bernie's stuff generally, frankly, to be honest. Okay, though Bernie and I have a firmer tie regarding questions of socialism and social democracy, perhaps. I then went on the show, and she just wanted to talk about FDR, and she wanted to pull out FDR's real progressivism, and even I'm convinced more and more that we utterly underestimate FDR's radicalism or the radicalism of his presidency. So, and a week later, after we finished that one, she called me and said, that was really good. Can we do a live stream on how FDR would handle inflation? I said, sure. We did that. And we got into a long conversation, still on a Zoom with each other, though not for public broadcasting. And I was really startled at just how committed she was to a progressive politics. I'm saying progressive. I don't want to exaggerate how far to the left that might be. And we ended up doing like daily texting and exchanges and conversation. And I ran a speaker series here at the university for 33 years of my 42 years on the faculty. And my young colleague, John Shelton, who you should think about having on, by the way.
I know John. Yeah, he's great. Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad you know.
We should.
To be honest, he's.
I play fantasy football with him.
Oh, good. Excellent. He's a good 30 years younger than I am, but he's my best friend. Okay. For what it's worth. Okay. And he's got this new book out, which is really important. So, okay. So I said to John, John and I were talking because they took the speaker series and they named it the Harvey Kaye Speaker Series to honor my retirements. Okay. And the first person we had in was Sarah Nelson. And then the following year, this would have been this past autumn, we brought in Marianne. And she and I spent a great deal of time talking. And she started talking to me about the idea of running again and, how I would respond to that. And I could tell you that I was very interested in what she was saying. And more importantly, this is the shocker, okay? And you could say, well, it's the guy supporting her because of his own ego. No. She really wanted to embrace a project I've been pushing for years now. And I worked very closely with Nina Turner a year ago. I mean, I was very close to Nina. We're still in almost daily contact. And it's an idea of redeeming and advancing in a 21st century version, an economic bill of rights, originally proposed by FDR in 44. 1960s, A. Philip Randolph produced, along with Bayard Rustin, a freedom budget built around the idea of the economic bill of rights. Martin Luther King Jr., not long before his assassination, tragically, issued a call for an economic bill of rights. Bernie, moderately, well, to some extent in 2015-16, but then all the more so in 2019-20, advanced the idea of an economic bill of rights. And here is Marianne, just like Nina, basically reaching out to me because they wanted to embrace and argue for and push. And I thought, if this is the case, I'm ready to help this woman. I definitely was. And in the post game, I can talk far more about that if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate that, and folks, I think we're going to jump over the post game right now, and we can talk a little bit more in depth about Marianne Williamson's campaign and some of the ideas and strategy as well.
I also want to ask Harvey about when FDR became cool again, because there must have been a period that it was not cool for Democrats to be like, oh yeah, this new guy, he's our new FDR. And then all of a
You want to
sudden,
ask me that here or in the post game?
let's do that in the post game.
Great.
The post game. And folks, so you get access at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll try to take some questions. If you do want to leave us a message, 1940-289-7234. But as we said at the beginning, please keep them more in the 30 to 45 second range so that we can get to folks and not keep Harvey too long. All right, folks, we'll
You
be
have
over
me
there
as long as you want me.
Well, thank you very much. But
I would never say no to you two
We're trying
guys.
to tell the people to keep the call short. No, I appreciate that. I'm always so thankful to have you in the post game. It's gonna be a lot of fun, folks. So jump over patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll be over there in about 5-10 minutes.
Peace.
Should I go put my LSU cap on?